there. We're just teasing. We're going to put them all around your glass. Jeff said we should put one in your glass. I said no. I might think it was something else.
That I'll call to order the meeting of the Committee of the Whole for Tuesday, September the 17th. Looking to the agenda, are there any additions or changes? Seeing none, I'll move the agenda be approved as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. We're moving on to item C1, the minutes of the Committee of the Whole for Tuesday, July 16th. Are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll move they be adopted as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. Turning now to item D1, the research report on overnight parking on municipal lots. Mr. Reynolds.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of Council. My name is Travis, and I'm the outreach worker that's been looking at the people living in their vehicles throughout the summer. And I'd just like to thank you for the opportunity to present some of my research findings. And before I go on, I'd like you to just hold your questions until the end, just try to, so I can make it through the story. So if you've got something to ask me, there will be time when the presentation's done. So I'm going to be presenting to you today the first two sections of my completed report. We'll be looking at the situation in Canmore as it stands right now, and I'll be discussing the results of the interviews I conducted with people living in their vehicle. On October 1st, I'll be back before you again to present the results of the business survey we conducted, as well as to discuss some of the two case studies that we looked at, the District of Squamish and the town of Banff. The report and my presentation are intended to help Council advise administration on the recommendations you'd like to see us bring forward to fully develop at a later date. So this sort of gives you ideas to consider, information about the vehicle dwelling situation, and things to sort of remember and pay attention to when we move forward with more firm and fully developed recommendations. So first off, I'll just describe some of the events that led up to the situation that we're experiencing right now, and many of you are familiar with what's transpired previously. As most people know, there's been an increase in the number of people living in their vehicles over the last couple of years. And in 2018, that population started to congregate in the gravel lot, or that gravel parkway that's behind Save-On Foods and adjacent to Elevation Place. And that spot I'll refer to as the gravel lot, throughout my presentation. And enough people congregated there and received enough attention that it became colloquially known as the community of Vanmore. Vanmore had a high number of people living in their vehicles throughout 2018. That number started to fall in the winter, and then started to increase again in the spring of 2019. As of May of this year, that lot became completely full, and a number of issues were identified based upon the situation then. These issues included things like derelict vehicles being parked in the lot, individuals storing things underneath their vehicle, vehicles actually being stored there, such as trailers, number of unregistered vehicles being there, and individuals setting up semi-permanent structures such as awnings and patios. So based on the issues identified, Council put forth or approved two motions in May, the first being the enforcement of a parking restriction that restricted parking in that gravel lot between 7 a.m. and 9 a.m. in the morning. And the second motion that was put forth was to hire an outreach worker to provide a degree of social service support for people living in their vehicles, to help identify the demographics of the people living in their vehicle, and to better understand the impacts of that parking restriction, and I am that outreach worker. So, the parking restriction went into effect on June 5th, And when that restriction came into effect, there was a change in behaviors in that gravel lot. Some people that were living in their vehicle left the gravel lot and dispersed throughout the community into neighboring streets. Others moved into neighboring areas such as in Exshaw, Harvey Heights. Some moved into some Alberta Parks lands. But a large number of people living in their vehicles stayed in that downtown core, and they stayed in 4 hotspots that we identified. The first one being the gravel lot, the second one being the Save-On Foods, what we call Save-On Foods, which are the parking lots adjacent and behind Save-On Foods that are associated with the store. The third one is Home Hardware, which is the vacant lot that sits behind Home Hardware. They don't lease the lot, but they were acting as agents for the private property owner. And the fourth hotspot that we identified was Elevation Place, in the 4-hour parking lot that sits, the paved lot that sits next to Elevation Place. So throughout the summer, lot counts were conducted on those 4 hotspots to see how many people living in their vehicles were frequenting these areas. It's important to point out that the lot counts that I'll give you are just approximations. It's very difficult to determine who is actually sleeping in a vehicle at any point in time. Just because somebody is sleeping in a vehicle, for an hour during the day doesn't mean they're staying there overnight. And just because a vehicle has a bed in it doesn't mean anybody's actually sleeping in it at that particular time. So we used, as a proxy to that count, we used vehicles that looked like somebody could sleep in them. So this included vehicles that had a bed in the back, vehicles that looked like, RVs or vehicles towing trailers or had campers on them, vehicles that looked like somebody could sleep in them. So if you look at the gravel lot here, if we start to work our way through the lot counts, in June, the average daily count of people living in their vehicles parked in the gravel lot was 10. In Save-On Foods, that average was 10 as well. In Home Hardware, it was 16, and in Elevation Place, it was 4. In July, the average number of vehicle dwellers parked daily in the gravel lot was 6. Save-On Foods, it was 11. Home Hardware, it was 24. Elevation Place, it was 9. And in August, it was 6 in the gravel lot, 13 at Save-On Foods, 4 at Home Hardware, and 19 at Elevation Place. And while the counts are an approximation, what I'd like to draw your attention to is the fact that there is a shifting number of counts depending on the month. So let's look at Home Hardware. Home Hardware had 16, then it had 24 in July, so it had the largest number of people living in their vehicles parked there, and then it had 4 in August. And the reason that 4 happened is because enforcement practices changed that Home Hardware lot. And I can best show this with this graph here. So if we looked at what happened throughout the summer, you can see that the number of individuals staying in the Home Hardware lot started to increase through the month of June and peaked somewhere at the start of July. But then there was a noticeable drop on July 5th. And the reason that drop occurred is because Home Hardware served notices to individuals that were parked there on behalf of the private property owner. Those notices simply declared that the lot was private property and individuals were not allowed to park there. Violators of that would be towed. Now, while the numbers did decline in the first half of June, the first half of July, as the month progressed, those numbers started to climb back up again. And the reason this happened is because what happened for 2 reasons. The first was that the notice was only given once. So individuals that came to the lot after the notice was served had no idea that it was a private space and they weren't allowed to park there. And also, too, while the notice did say that violators would be towed, that towing was never enforced. And so you had people that didn't know what was going on, coupled with the fact that enforcement never happened. So the lot counts came up again. That changed as of August, because on August 1st, Home Hardware erected no parking signs in that spot. So every vehicle that was there was warned that they weren't allowed to be there, or supposed to be there. And that caused a noticeable decline, or a precipitous decline. And then on the 12th of August, they actually erected fencing around that lot, so thus prohibiting individuals from parking there. So what's important to recognize is that as lot counts, or the number of vehicle dwellers parked in a variety of lots, and the lots changed throughout the summer, they moved to different locations. And so as Home Hardware became available, you saw an increase in the number of vehicle dwellers parked at Elevation Place and parked at Save-On Foods. So really what's important to pay attention to here is that while some vehicle dwellers did leave, that population was relatively consistent throughout the summer, and they simply shifted locations. And so as enforcement changed in particular spots, they would move to locations that had different types of enforcement or were more or less amenable to them parking there. And so this is important to recognize, that piecemeal enforcement will just cause individuals to move around. And that was sort of the first big thing that became apparent in the research that I was doing. And the second big thing that sort of came out when I was looking at, that's much brighter than I thought it was going to be. On screens where it's not neon, it's a very lovely shade of green. So Pardon that color, it'll pop up one more time. I just wanted to blind you with it. Anyway, so the second thing that I discovered was that vehicle-dwelling population is not a homogeneous group. They're not all the same. It's different individuals with different needs, and it's comprised of 3 different groups that I'll talk about in a bit. And we realized this as we conducted the interviews throughout the summer. And so I conducted 30 interviews with individuals living in their vehicles, and these interviews ranged from 15 minutes to 2 hours long, depending on the story that they wanted to share and how in-depth they wanted to go in their experience. I used convenient sampling to find the people I was going to interview. So basically what I did is walk through the 4 hotspots and approached people that were outside of their vehicles, that had their vehicle door open, things like that. I wasn't knocking on cars. I wasn't randomly walking to people up in the street. I was just trying to be non-invasive, but still collect the information I needed. And also, I was approached by some people living in their vehicles based on the interview that I had done for the Rocky Mountain Outlook, as well as 2 interviews that were done for CBC Radio, talking about what was going on in town and the research that I was conducting. So based on the interviews that I did, of the 30 people that I talked to, 12 were female with an average age of 28 years, and 18 were male with an average age of 34. Of the 30 I talked to, 24 of them were Canadian citizens, and of that 6, 5 of them were here on work visas, and another was here on a tourist visa. So the median amount of time that individuals I talked to spent living in their vehicle was 75 days. Now the reason I used the median is because instead of using something like the average time spent in a vehicle, was because there are some outlying data. So some individuals had spent a long period of time in their car, but it was only a very small number. But including them in my calculations would have upwardly biased the average. And so the median provides a way to sort of go beyond and sort of remove yourself from the outliers. And basically what the median does is it splits the data set into half. So 50% of individuals are below a median and 50% are above. So at 75 days or 2.5 months, that was sort of a middle ground in terms of how long people spent living in their vehicles. Now, the 3 most common reasons for living in a vehicle was the first one was traveling. People were traveling through. The second one was people were trying to save money. And the third was that they could not afford rent in town. Other reasons that were also given were that they were part of van life, they were trying to live a minimalist lifestyle, they enjoyed sort of that freedom attached to it, but these considerations weren't quite as big or as prominent as that financial concern, sort of saving money and not being able to afford rent. And even traveling is a financial concern because it is, it's cheaper to stay in a vehicle than it is to pay for a campsite or it is to pay for a hotel as you're traveling through. Now, once people got to town, the 3 most common ways that they learned where to park was through word of mouth, observation, and using travel websites or apps. So some people were told where to park, in conversations with friends that had been in Vanmore, in conversation with family. Some people met strangers on a hiking trail and said, where do I park in Canmore? And they said, park behind, save on foods. One individual was told where to park from a climbing gym in Calgary. Once we learned about that, we called the climbing and said, this isn't a campsite, and sort of changed the information that was out there. But word of mouth seemed to be the easiest way for people to figure out where to park. The second easiest way people used was observation. So simply just driving around town, seeing where people living in their vehicles or vehicles had congregated, and also just seeing what signage was up there. So places that didn't have no parking signs, they would sort of park there. And the last most prominent way was using a website or an app, and the most common app that people seemed to use was iOverlander. In terms of time spent in Canmore, the median duration of stay in Canmore was 89 days. Now, duration of stay is a combination of how long people had been in town before I interviewed them and how long they thought they were going to be staying in town subsequent. So it is an approximation. Some people would leave earlier than when they thought they'd be leaving. Some people would stay a bit longer. But for the most part, it was that median was 89 days. And the 3 most common reasons people gave for coming to town were to work, to tourist or sightsee, or to climb or bike. Once people were in town, the facility that they most often used, or the amenity they most often used, was Elevation Place. So that was the place that they frequented most to shower or to use the bathroom facility. In terms of showering at Elevation Place, they did have to pay for use, and so you're either paying for a day rate or you're having a monthly membership. So this indicated there was a willingness to pay for things, that they're not necessarily living for free in town. And this was a sentiment that was expressed quite strongly by a girl that I had interviewed. And she said that she only used bathroom facilities in places that she patronized. And so by being a paying customer, she thought that she was able to use the bathroom facilities there. And she also had a membership to Elevation Place, which was where she showered. And this willingness to pay is also something that was conveyed when I asked people, would they be willing to pay for a parking spot overnight? The majority of people that I talked to, 24 out of the 30, were willing to pay for something, for an overnight spot. The average amount of money they were willing to pay was $8 a night. And this is just simply to park a vehicle. It's not to camp, it's not to unload a vehicle, it's not to set up a picnic table or anything else like that. It's just simply a secure place to park overnight. And the only amenity they were really thinking about talking about was, or asking for, was a bathroom. So there wasn't power, there wasn't water, there wasn't a dumping spot. It was just strictly a parking spot. And one of the things that had sort of come up in conversations, listening to previous presentations, was a discussion on furnaces and heaters in vehicles. So I asked the people that I talked to, do you have a heater in your vehicle? 9 out of the 30 did. But simply having a heater in your vehicle doesn't mean your vehicle's winterized. Most of the people that I talked to said that their vehicle wasn't going to be able to handle cold temperatures, and one was very adamant that he was going to be leaving once it warmed up. I did talk to one couple that had stayed in that gravel lot throughout the winter, so they'd moved in there in February. And they were fine up until when their heater broke down, and one night it crapped out, and they woke up in the morning, it was minus 39 degrees inside their van. They continued to stay in their vehicle throughout the winter, but what they did to sort of avoid that coming up again is that they just bought really, really expensive sleeping bags that were designed to be in cold weather, and they made it through comfortably through the winter. But it wasn't an experience that most of the people that I was talking to wanted to do. The majority of people that I talked to were going to leave at the end of the winter season and when it got cold. So this is something to pay attention to when council starts to consider recommendations and things moving forward, is it's a seasonal issue to a large extent. When the weather's warm, people will be living in their vehicles. When it gets cold, they'll move on. I also asked interviewees about their understanding of leave no trace camping principles. And the reason I did this was because there was some feeling from administration at the start of this year in May that individuals in that space, in the gravel lot, weren't abiding by leave no trace camping principles, and this meant that there was an increased likelihood or increased chance of fires, and also there was an increased chance that people leave their garbage behind, which is unsightly and it also attracts animals. And the other reason I asked about leave no trace principles is because the District of Squamish has actually incorporated those principles into the guidelines it gives new visitors to the district, and they act as a way of a sort of a loose guide of informing what Squamish has determined as proper behavior. So those principles are: plan ahead and prepare, travel and camp on durable surfaces, dispose of waste properly, leave what you find, minimize campfire impacts, respect wildlife, and be considerate of others. And while they aren't necessarily completely applicable to staying in Canmore, they do give a general guide, of being good neighbors and being respectful of the environment you're in. So when I asked people what they understood leave no trace camping to be, or leave no trace to be, most people said that it was the concept of leaving a space better than how you found it. So not making a mess, being sort of unobtrusive, living under the radar, and then moving on and not having a lasting impact. They also mentioned picking up your garbage and things like that. Not a lot of them talked about animal attractants or being bear aware of that sort of thing, but overall the discussion was trying to be respectful of the environment that you're in. So being respectful for Canmore while they were here. So based on those interviews, I categorized the people I talked to into 3 different groups. So we have visitors, employees, and higher needs individuals. So out of the 30 people I talked to, I classified 8 as visitor. The average age of visitors was 33 years. The median amount of time they spent in Canmore, so again, that was time prior to talking to me, was 3 days. The median amount of time they'd spent in their vehicle was 68 days. The reason for being in the vehicle was because they were traveling, they weren't employed in the town, and they have a weak connection to Canmore as a community. Employees, I talked to, there were 20 people that I talked to, I classified as employee. Their average age was 29 years. The median amount of time they'd spent in Canmore was 130 days, so just over 4 months. The median amount of time they'd spent in their vehicle was 83 days. The reason they were in the vehicle is because they could not afford rent. They were employed in town, and they had a strong connection to the community. For higher needs, the number I spoke to was only 2 individuals I would classify as higher needs. The average age was 56 years, so they were older than visitors or employees. One of them had spent 730 days in town and had been living in his vehicle the entire time. The reason that they were in their vehicles is because they could not afford rent, and they are not employed in the town. That's okay. Usually that's me, so it's totally fine. Looking at That visitor group, so their median duration of stay in town was 7 days. That, again, that's how long they've been in town before they talked to me and how long they were intending to stay in town. So basically, they were going to be in town for about a week. And they also belonged to 2 different communities. So they felt that they were part of a vehicle dwelling community. And only one of them, person I talked to, so one visitor, felt that they belonged to Canmore as a whole. And then I talked to some people and they gave examples of visitors being good neighbors. One person I talked to actually went to the management at Save On Foods and asked them if it was okay if he parked in their lot overnight and received permission from them. He also cleaned up the parking spot around him and swept up cigarette butts and stuff that other people had left there. Another person I talked to, she was adamant in the fact that she would clean the space and the environment before she would leave. There were examples, and people did talk about other types of behaviors and stuff, but most of the things and most of what people told me and the experiences that I had was that, like any group, there's some good behavior and some bad behavior. So it's not like they all behave in one particular way. There's examples of everything. So even in our own neighborhoods, I have good neighbors and I have bad neighbors as well. So it just seems to be, these groups themselves are dynamic and hard to classify as one thing or the other. But the thing to remember with the visitors is that Canmore to them is a destination. It's not their home. They're passing through. Their connection is a little bit less to the community than it was compared to employees, and they're here for a shorter period of time. So for employees, the median duration of their stay was 156 days. And I think there's a misprint on my slide back there. They've been in town for longer usually than they've been in their vehicles, because some employees that I talked to actually were living in the Bow Valley in the wintertime, and then they moved into their vehicles. And so, there was a tendency for them to be in the valley longer or in Canmore longer than actually had they stayed in their vehicle. And they moved into vehicles in the summertime and moved back out of them in the winter. So out of the 20 employees that I talked to, 13 employees were full-time or worked full-time in town, 5 worked part-time, and 2 were looking for work. On average, employees worked for 38 hours per week. 10 worked in the hospitality or food services sector, 4 worked in recreation, 4 worked in retail, 1 worked in tourism, and 1 worked in the arts. Some of the employees, so 5 of them, had been offered staff accommodation but had refused it or declined it. And the reason that they declined it was staff accom was too expensive, it was a lower quality, and one of them actually just enjoyed the freedom of living in her vehicle. 12 of the employees that I talked to worked for people that knew they lived in their vehicle. And for the most part, the experience was that employers were accommodating of individuals that lived in a vehicle. One interviewer actually mentioned to me that her employer said they didn't care if she turned up or lived in a vehicle, as long as she turned up for work smart and dressed tidily. So, regardless of where somebody lived, the employers didn't seem to mind as long as they behaved in the same way that anybody would, work well and things like that. Employees also belong to 3 different communities. So the vehicle dweller community, same as visitors. The Canmore community, same as visitors. But they also belong to a community with their coworkers. And a higher percentage of employees felt like they belonged to Canmore in total, or as a whole, so about 40% of them, compared to visitors. Only 12.5% of visitors felt like they belonged to Canmore as a whole. Also, 20% of employees actually volunteered in town. So were engaged in some sort of volunteer work and service in town, unpaid work. And also, too, 1 visitor did as well, and 1 higher needs. But the fact that 20% of employees volunteered in town and 40% of them felt that they were part of the community reinforced a suggestion that was made to me by one person that I interviewed, that employees want to be part of Canmore. They want to be part of the community. And this was demonstrated, there's that green again. This was demonstrated by their connection to the town and that they volunteered. Looking at that higher needs group, so only 2 people I considered higher needs. They required a significant amount of support and social support. This included things like access to food. They had more prominent issues of affordable housing, and some of them, they may require emergency funds to help them make ends meet. They may also suffer from mental or physical health issues. And one of the things that sort of designated higher needs from visitors' employees is that they weren't mobile. Their vehicles weren't working, were broken down, and not just a minor breakdown, but these were large-scale, expensive breakdowns that required funds that they either didn't have or time just to be in the community to get their vehicles up and running. And this raises, brings my point of you can shift between categories. So simply because you're a visitor when you pull into town, if your vehicle breaks down, you don't have enough money to fix it, you can slide to that higher needs category. And that actually happened to one of the individuals I talked to. They were passing through, had mechanical issues, and then they were living on unlimited government funding and waiting for their retirement check to come in to actually be able to fix their vehicle and move on. That being said, you can also move from the higher needs up to visitors or employees depending upon how your situation changes. So it's a fluid, these are fluid, permeable groups, and you can slide back and forth. So one thing to recognize with the higher needs, and it's not only the higher needs, but it's all vehicle dwellers in general, is the fact that they don't have permanent addresses in town, and this limits the amount of support or the types of programs they can qualify for. And also, sometimes they're just not in town long enough. So this may be something that council considers. And looking at recommendations moving forward is the question of, what requires a permanent address or what we consider a permanent address. So looking at the visitors and the employees and the categories, you'll see that they both thought they belonged to a vehicle dwelling community. And this was something that I felt was quite important to recognize, is that there is a sort of a self-sustaining, self-enforcing community of people living in their vehicles. And by that I mean members of this community, they look out for each other and they try to maintain standards of behavior. So examples that I witnessed or was told about was that one person I talked to, her vehicle was experiencing mechanical issues, and other people in that vehicle dwelling community who had mechanical experience helped her diagnose the problem, helped get her vehicle to a mechanic. So they were sort of looking out for her and making sure that her vehicle was able to run. One individual that I talked to had no food. Other people in that community gave him some food so he had things to eat, so they were looking out for making sure that he wasn't starving. And there was also an instance where I was told of an individual in that community inappropriately behaving inappropriately towards women, and he was ostracized in that community. So they sort of said your behavior is inappropriate, and they asked him to leave, where he was staying. So it may be worthwhile for council and for administration to consider engaging this community moving forward in the recommendations. This is something that Squamish has done as they've developed their bylaws, the bylaw that has affected what they call wild camping or staying in a vehicle in the district. They've engaged that vehicle dwelling community as they've moved forward. And I'll talk more about this on the October 1st presentation. So this leads me to sort of summarize what I've been talking about and giving council some points to consider. One thing that we should always remember is that vehicle dweller community, they will move as conditions change. So they'll move depending to neighboring communities, they'll move throughout the town, depending upon what enforcement restrictions are put in place and depending upon what's more or less amenable to who they are. People living in the vehicles are also willing to pay to be in Canmore, whether it's at $8 to pay for a parking spot for $8 a night or having a membership to Elevation Place. There is a desire to pay for the services they use. They do recognize, some of them did recognize that they are living much cheaper than homeowners that pay their taxes that are paying a much higher amount of money to be in town. Also, we should pay attention to the fact that vehicle dwellers are not a homogeneous group, whether they're visitors or employees of higher needs, and that people can shift between these categories. Also, more than half of the people that I talk to work in town. So 18 of the 20 people that I talk to work full-time in Canmore or the Bow Valley. And to remember, too, that this situation is always changing. So the events that led to the parking restriction coming in place on June 5th are different than the situation that is now. And this situation will be different again, what happens next year. And so recommendations and policies that the town puts in place should be forward-looking and not simply based on what's happening at this current time. So again, I'd just like to reiterate that I'll be back on October 1st to present the second half of my report. And I'd just like council to sort of think about the recommendations that they'll become, that they're open to moving forward, that administration will put together at a later date. So thank you for your time, and now I'm open to questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation. A couple of questions, just out of curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
In the initial part of your report, you were talking about daily counts. Was that a daily count at a specific time, so every day at the same time you were doing
Some
a
of
count?
the counts that were done, peace officers would do a count for us, and they would happen between 7:30 and 8 in the morning, so that was consistent. And then I would try to do a count sort of a midday, and I did some on the weekends and evenings. So I was trying to get sort of more of a diverse number of times in there, and a degree of variation in those count times. Still, it's difficult to actually be there in a particular period of time. So some days, there's a regular count in the mornings quite frequently, and then it was just sort of when additional resources or times became available, I'd go in and do something.
Okay, but generally early in the morning, right?
Yep.
And I'm curious as well, I'm not sure I've ever heard whether or not Save On Foods ever did any specific enforcement on parking in their lot overnight?
They had a general policy for the summer that it was, you could park there between 9 at night and 9 in the morning, as long as you moved on when the store opened up. I don't know what their policy is now. I don't know. There was some discussion and some conversations they had with us about moving towards a different enforcement policy, but I don't know what they've done since.
But their lot isn't posted to that effect, is it?
They have no overnight parking signs posted,
Right.
and they've had those up for a while. They just haven't enforced them.
Councillor Seeley.
Thank you, Mayor Borman. I never noticed in your report, maybe it wasn't part of what you were bringing to us, but what have other municipalities done as far as where the people are parking and stuff?
Well, I will be bringing that to you on October 1st. There's a significant portion of my report that you'll see later on that does deal with what Squamish has done, what Banff has done, Jasper. I can give you a quick overview, but I don't want to get too far into it because it's a conversation of a later date. Squamish allows them to park there. They've worked on a relationship in terms of a limited parking, but they do allow people in their vehicles to park in particular areas for free. Banff is full enforcement. Jasper is full enforcement. Revelstoke allows people to park there without really any enforcement at this point in time. So, but each one of these policies will have issues attached to it, and they will happen to a greater or lesser degree of success. So on October 1st, I'll sort of give you a better picture of what other municipalities have done.
Yeah, and I guess where I'm going with this is I would rather see something more intentional, because what's happened has been unintentional and convenient. So have other municipalities dealt with that, where they've actually shifted the location and thought about that?
Yes, yeah. Well, I mean, Squamish is a prime example. And so the report the rest of the report that will become available to you guys in a couple of weeks will give a very detailed description of what Squamish has done. So they've moved to a limited and restricted areas that they're allowed to park. I'll also touch upon in the end of the report, there's a series of programs in the U.S. called Safe Park programs. A lot of larger cities in California have issues of individuals living in their vehicles, truly homeless individuals staying in their vehicles, and some of them have instituted these Safe Park programs, so they've repurposed a municipal lot or a church lot, for example, so that people can park there in the evening, and they just have to leave at a particular time in the morning. And there's a variety of criteria that are attached to these lots. Interestingly enough, the state of California is actually working on passing a bill that will mandate any city larger than 330,000 people will have to have a Safe Park program in place. And they're also looking at passing a bill that will mandate any community college will have to have a Safe Park program in place for students that are homeless living in their vehicles. So this is something that's been considered on a larger scale, at least in California. Other municipalities in the U.S. That don't have Safe Park programs that are run municipally, they have churches, and church groups are often doing it, and they'll provide a lot because their lots are underused throughout the week. So that's another thing that we'll talk about on October 1st, and something to think about as well, is that there's a wide range of policy responses that go from it simply being an outright enforcement or a ban on overnight parking to being something that has no restrictions. And then something like a Safe Park program or what Squamish has done sits somewhere in the middle of that spectrum.
Just curious on that note, the Safe Park programs, do you know if those programs that are being trialed or in place in other communities, if the program identifies who can take advantage of the Safe Park?
They have criteria.
Pardon me?
They have criteria.
Okay.
Yeah. So depending on the organization that's running it, they often have type of vehicle criteria. So they're not looking at RVs, they're not looking at large vehicles, it's smaller sort of regular footprint vehicles. There may be a criteria in terms of you have to meet an economic threshold. Some have criteria of doing background checks. So it varies depending upon the organization that's putting on, but it's never simply a policy of just letting anybody park there. There's always some sort of application process that has to be undertaken and filled out before you're allowed to park in the spot.
Thank you. Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. Thank you for your presentation. In the ending of your written report, you had mentioned that you were reaching out to some stakeholders, and there was additional stakeholder engagement beyond the people that you interviewed in their vehicles. Had you had any input from the nearby residents, from the condo buildings nearby?
I had put out, but we had contact information myself was published, and nobody actually from that community reached out to me. I made myself available via email or phone, and I did not receive any feedback from them, no.
Oh, okay. So you weren't aware of the concerns that were not so much with the people in the vans, but the interface of the people in the vans with their nearby neighbors?
Yeah, Lisa can.
Sorry to just jump in there. So what we really wanted to focus on for this research project was the people in the van. So we really wanted to focus on who is staying here and why. And we did keep track of social media and comments made from the community, but this project was about the van dwellers themselves.
Okay. Well, there was just a list of additional stakeholders, being Save-On and Home Hardware and the MD of Bighorn, Town of Banff, but not necessarily adjacent neighbors.
Aside from discussion with Save-On Foods, who would be a directly adjacent member, no, not per se. I mean, I made myself available, but again, I wasn't going to be knocking on doors and going to the community. So my number was out there, and they were able to reach out to me, and there was a general call for the public to get hold of me if they wanted to.
And in your stakeholder engagement, you also mentioned local churches. Did you reach out specifically to the New Catholic Church?
I did not. I reached out to Trinity at that point.
Trinity?
Because they have a lot that was available right now, but Sally?
Thank you, Mayor
Did you want
Barrowman.
to say something?
Yeah, I do, thank you. I have reached out to the Catholic Church, and I believe Ms. Brown has historically, but we've yet to hear back from them. So I know they're in the middle of a building project. We'll continue to try to reach out to them. And then just a word on stakeholder engagement. So as Ms. Brown said, this was really about people who are living in their vehicles. The other people who are identified there are other businesses who had people living in vehicles on their property. So it was really more about how other vehicle spaces in town are. If we tried to reach out to every adjacent neighbor, I mean, people are living in their vehicles in my neighborhood, right? So that becomes really a bit of a beast. Elevation Place, I know, is a bit separate, but what we've really been dealing with are other agencies or businesses also dealing with it. And we will continue to reach out to the Catholic Church. If anyone has a good connection there, I would welcome it.
Thank
May I
you.
ask one more question?
Yes.
Will there be some consideration of what sorts of housing developments are now coming online? Because there are a few people that were identified as hard to house or having more needs than just living in a van. They obviously need some other services that might help their the quality of life improve. So I'm understanding that the Y in Banff has some new facilities coming on stream. Are there some facilities that might be able to help people in that circumstance?
That would be out of the purview of what I would be able to comment on. This might be something Lisa could talk about.
Thank you for your question. So on October 1st, what we're going to be looking for is where on the spectrum would you like us to look for administration to direct their attention. But when we have that answer and really understand where council wants us to look, we will make sure that we start reaching out and getting a very comprehensive recommendation that we could give to council. Where we're talking to our planning department, we'll be reaching out to other resources in the community and make sure that all that's there for council's information.
Okay, so we're getting a report in October, and some of these things will be considered.
Yeah, getting a report in October to give administration direction of where we should really put our attention and our focus to, and then subsequent after that, we'll be presenting another report on on the recommendations, and that are completely fleshed out.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Comfort.
Yeah, I'm just curious, you had made a passing reference to how news circulated within the group, and you mentioned things like they self-enforced if somebody wasn't following the rules or the informal set of rules. And they also, I think that news seemed to travel very quickly if the rules changed, like the parking enforcement, or it became very clear very quickly to folks that were living in their vehicles that notices that said your vehicle will be towed, they knew it after 2 days it wasn't happening, that sort of thing. So I guess the message there is if we're going to put up notices that have to do with enforcement, we should enforce.
Yeah, there's a degree of, and this will be a bit addressed, you'll see it's come out of Squamish and stuff there as well, is that it's just the consistent enforcement of an expectation, regardless of what that expectation is. So part of what's happened throughout this season is that, and it's not just everybody living in their vehicles, it's expectations of the community and private businesses. It's changed throughout the season. And so at the start of the year, Vanmore existed. With the parking restriction coming into place, that caused vehicle dwellers to move to different locations and move around lots. And so that changed the expectations on where they thought they could stay, but also changed, what private property saw, so owners saw. So you saw signage coming up, and that changed behaviors and stuff. So what's happened is that throughout this season, the situation has evolved consistently, and that's changed the behaviors, and that's changed what people think they're allowed to do or able to do. And that's sort of what Squamish has experienced. And what they're trying to set up for next year, by putting in the bylaw and putting in the notifications of proper behaviors that they like, and things like that, is to establish those expectations early on and enforce them throughout. And that was one of the comments that were made by an individual in their climate community, was that if expectations are established at the start of a season, it will change the behavior from that season, and also it'll change the behavior subsequent. So, what you see, if there's things that people are doing that you don't want, or behaviors that you want to promote, the promoted behaviors will increase, and the ones you don't want will decrease, and then the following season, you still get, that'll be even more pronounced effect. So it's establishing early on what the expectations are, both on the town's part and from people living in their vehicles, and then maintaining those expectations throughout the year.
Thank you.
Councillor McCallum?
Thank you, Mayor Borman. Oh, that was painful. Thank you for your presentation. So I had a question. I have several questions, actually. In your report, you speak to the third most common way that van dwellers were able to find out about free camping, and that was through websites and apps like iOverlander and Boondocking. Have you had an opportunity, or somebody in the office had the opportunity to contact those sites and correct the record in terms of that? There
was some movement towards that, but also too, you'll notice that things like iOverlander, users are updating it as well. So if it was something that for a spot that was here, somebody would say, well, it was 2 years ago, this was it. I've gone to the spot and it's no longer available. And so it also, to some extent, something like iOverlander is a self-correcting phenomenon. And so people will post, people that are active will post things saying what's available and what's not available. So if expectations are there, or an understanding of what they can or cannot do, or they're established early on, that will change what appears on something like iOverlander.
Gotcha. I just wanted to make sure.
Yep.
When you were speaking with folks that were employed in Canmore, and they stated that that the staff accom was too expensive or not affordable, did they provide for you a number as to what was affordable?
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at, if we can just use that $8 a night, or $5 to $8 a night, it's $300 to $400 is something that's sort of amenable to people that were living in the vehicle, because they've made that choice to live in their van.
Well, but they're looking at $8 a night without any amenities. But I mean, if they're provided amenities, like what? 3, 4, like some would say, I asked, what a monthly accommodation would be, and it was a huge range. I mean, it was depending upon, some said 6, some said 7, some said 9. Okay,
it all
so
depended on
range.
sort of what was there. One of the bigger issues that sort of came up was that it was that communal living aspect, and that was something that they'd sort of mentioned. Even individuals that weren't given staff accommodations had mentioned, was that living in a vehicle gave you a sense of independence, and you were sort of, you were living in your own space. And so, anecdotally, there were some stories about, issues that people had living in staff accom or living in environments that were these shared housing situations. And then the couple that I'd mentioned that were living in their vehicle in February, part of the reason that they were there is because they'd been living in a spot in Banff in what, was not staff accom, but it was accommodations that were designed for people that were working throughout the town. And they were living in the laundry room. So they were right behind a washroom, and it wasn't acceptable for them, so they moved into their vehicle,
and it shouldn't be acceptable, period.
So that was part of what's gone on. You'll see that when we go and look at the business survey on October 1st, is that there aren't a lot of businesses in town that provide staff accommodations, whether they are a legal staff accom or an unzoned staff accom. It's not it's a small amount, and that lack of affordable housing is a consideration that businesses are paying attention to. So it is something that we'll talk a little bit more about later on.
Perfect.
Just, can I
yeah.
So that last point, would you repeat that?
So part of what I'll be talking about on October 1st is we did a business survey, and we sent a survey out to local businesses through economic development, and I had 135 businesses respond.
How many?
135.
Excellent.
Yeah, so we had a 25% response rate to the survey. And just sort of looking at, just addressing something that Vi had mentioned earlier, was addressing the general community, is that there were a number of comments that businesses had provided that were sort of talking about vehicle dwelling and their perceptions of it, and some people were open to it, and some people were not open to it and stuff. So it to an extent, it captured a bit of what the general public's perception was of it. And the businesses that reported back, and I don't have the numbers with me now, but I will present them to you in October, but the number that actually had staff accom, whether they were zoned or unzoned for staff accom, was quite low. And issues of affordable housing and staff accommodations, or where staff was going to stay, was something that was quite, a large number of the businesses, it was a primary concern.
Thank you.
Do I get it back?
Mhm.
Perfect. Actually, sorry, I'm going to go back to what you were just saying, because you speak really fast.
Sorry,
and I thought I spoke fast.
do that. If you'd like me to go slower, I can.
That's okay. So one of the concerns that came out of the business community out of that survey was that the fact for the business community themselves to be able to get into housing, to be able to supply it, is that what you were trying to say?
There was some of that.
Okay.
Some of the concern was that for businesses that don't have staff accom, is that it's too expensive for them to provide staff accommodations
Right.
now. Some of the businesses that responded, their concern was just about affordable housing, and so that they couldn't find the skilled staff in town because that staff couldn't find a place to live.
Gotcha.
So it was a combination. of
Okay, so it was an all-around.
It's an
okay,
all-around,
perfect.
yeah.
Thank you. So of the two folks that you interviewed that were higher needs people, and I'm sure there's more than two,
Yeah.
those are the two that chose to talk to you. They are unable to receive affordable, CAM or the Affordability Services Program, or to tap into that, but they're able to get government support because they have an address, but you need an address to be able to get your government support. So how?
But they have addresses elsewhere. So
Okay.
they have a permanent
In the
one.
country
In the
or
country.
in
They
the
were from BC. So
province.
one had a permanent address in BC that he was getting his mail from, but was never going to live there, according to the story that he told me. And another one was just passing through, but they were in town. He had been in town for 3 weeks when I talked to him. His vehicle still wasn't fixed.
Okay.
And just didn't have the funds coming in, so it was being mailed to a post office box or his place, wherever he was from. So they had permanent addresses elsewhere,
But not here.
but not here, so they weren't attached to that.
And did anybody actually speak to the issue of being able to get a permanent address that's low cost? Like, when I first moved out west 20 years ago, I got myself my GD box up in Lake Louise, and I could get all of my mail through general delivery.
Yeah.
At some point, I decided I wanted to be an adult and have a post office box, so I paid my $130 a year, and I got my post office
Yeah.
box. General delivery now, after 3 months, you actually have to pay the equivalent of a post office box in Canmore. So there's actually no place for you to receive for more than 3 months, anywhere in Canada, general delivery that you don't pay for anymore, unless it's which is interesting, because you get it to your door for free, for free. So was there any at all discussion about, did anybody bring that up at all?
Some people, well, what I'd asked them about is whether they had permanent addresses outside of Canmore. So some people indicated that they, some of the people that were traveling, had places in Ontario, things like that. One person I talked to that was living in a vehicle actually had an uncle that lived in town. So, she was using this person to get mail, things like that. So it wasn't necessarily a concern that they had about post office boxes per se, but there was a discussion in terms of wanting to become more of a permanent part of the community, and whether that, whether it was living in their vehicle for a variety of different reasons, but still having that vehicle as being an address or being someplace that was recognized as a place to have mail, or recognized by town, or what have you. So that was something that the people had brought up. Not so much as a post office box.
Because that is, for homeless people in general, the biggest sort of barrier for them to receiving any kind of assistance.
Yeah.
Is a permanent address. Okay. And
I'll move on.
when
to
you
Councillor.
provide, I got one more, sorry, just one more. When you continue to do your research about what's happening in British Columbia, do not forget that British Columbia provides free camping pretty much all over the province en masse on their crown lands. There is a book that I bought, Camping Free in BC, that I just recently bought the sequel to, where you pay like $40 and you can camp anywhere you want. And so I know that some
It's
of
here
those
too.
Forestry Service roads are being used as public camping or for housing as well.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit easier in parts
Well,
of
but
British
it's
Columbia.
the same situation here, and this is part of what people at Harvey Heights are experiencing, is because the Crown land is, the community is enveloped by Crown land, is that individuals are able to go off, it's a certain distance off of a road that you can camp in Crown land, as long as you're abiding by, not leaving an unattended fire and not leaving garbage. And so these things can be done. But that Crown land rule also depends upon what municipality you're talking to, right? So Squamish, the majority of that free camping that's happening in their district, and it's 100 and some odd square kilometers, it's a massive space, is on Crown land. But because if Crown land falls under a municipality, it's controlled under that municipality. So there is a bit of difference, but that Crown land phenomenon is something that's happening in Alberta as well. And it is, when I talk to...
Well, they're developed campsites though in BC.
Yeah,
like
so maybe
fire
a bit
pits,
different.
a
Yeah.
pit toilet.
So that's not quite the same as what's going on
No.
here, no. And that's a phenomenon too in the US. I talked to an individual that he was traveling through, and as he was moving through, he talked to their forestry services, and every time he went to a national park, he talked to them, and they would point him to free campsites. And so it's a bit different than what goes on here. The report that you guys received for the October presentation as well, there is a discussion in there about campsites and stuff that are around the town, so that is a bit addressed as well.
Perfect. So you'll dive deeper into what was available during that period of time
Yep.
as well. Excellent. Thank you very kindly.
I think that's all the questions we have today. Thanks very much,
Thank you for your time.
Mr. Reynolds. Just one observation. The report mentioned or talks about the same experience happening in the MD and on Alberta Parks land. So clearly, it would be worthwhile to initiate, if we haven't already, a collaborative approach to working on this issue in the Bow Valley.
Yeah, this is one of the things that I had spoke to conservation officer from Alberta Parks, and I'd spoken to a municipal, or a peace officer from MD of Bighorn, which is Exshaw and Harvey Heights, and that's one of the things that they'd mentioned as well, is as the town moves forward, is to working together with these neighboring communities, because if it's simply just, again, that piecemeal approach where, let's say Exshaw does something, people will move to one location or another. So it's that now's the chance for everybody to work together and sort of formulate a strategy for the Bow Valley as we move forward and going from there.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks again. This time we'll move on to item D2, the Teepee Town Area Redevelopment Plan and Land Use Bylaw. Mr. Gravel.
Okay, Mayor Borman, members of council, allow me to briefly update you on the status of the Teepee Town ARP project. As council is aware, the Teepee Town ARP has been under review, and we want to share with you today where we're at in that process. Unfortunately, there will be no spoilers today with regards to detailed and specific changes underway. However, today's presentation will provide you with a good understanding of the proposed scope of changes, when the public will have the opportunity to view the changes, and when revised documents will be provided to council for first reading. So just a bit of background and context for you. The ARP was approved by council in 2005. Since that time, Teepee Town has not experienced the amount of redevelopment anticipated, with approximately 15% of existing structures having undergone redevelopment. Between 2014 and 2016, the Teepee Town Task Force and the development community requested that administration review the ARP, as well as the Teepee Town Comprehensive Redevelopment District. The concerns included the development regulations in the ARP are not user-friendly, and that more development flexibility is needed in order to achieve the goals of the ARP and to remove barriers to redevelopment. Since 2017, administration has been reviewing the ARP and the TPT-CR district. The project initially focused on changes to the district for such things as building height, building setbacks, landscaping, and so forth. However, additional amendments were required to the ARP to eliminate duplication of language currently found between the ARP and the LUB, as well as focus the language within the ARP at a policy level. In 2017, an online survey was conducted and an open house held to gather feedback from the community on a number of topics, including neighborhood, site and building design requirements, and suites in multifamily development. The takeaway from the 2017 engagement was that residents were open to changing the development regulations that govern Teepee Town. The highlights of the feedback received include, as you can see up on the slide, support for suites in duplexes and in townhouses in all areas, a preference for development flexibility over a distinct neighborhood, a preference for landscaping with new development over preserving mature trees, and a preference for maintaining current parking requirements. In addition, residents were open to increasing building heights and also open to more modern architecture, contemporary mountain town style architecture. So fast forward to 2019, we've taken this into consideration, and the scope of the ARP project includes ensuring that land in Teepee Town is developed efficiently. For example, administration will analyze the land use concept for Teepee Town, looking for opportunities to adjust densities to support context-sensitive intensification. Also supporting the creation of increased housing opportunities in Teepee Town. For example, we'll explore ways to encourage the development of rental housing as part of redevelopment through increased built form options, incentives, and allowing for suites and multifamily developments. Furthermore, creating a more policy-focused and user-friendly ARP. For example, as I mentioned, the ARP contains highly detailed regulations that are mirrored in the TPT-CR district within the LUB. That level of detail is unusual for an ARP, and it limits its effectiveness as a tool for making high-level decisions. Also, updating the transportation policies within the ARP. The engineering department is reviewing the transportation policies. There won't be any changes to the transportation network in Teepee Town, and there also won't be any designs put forth for new street concepts at the moment. That's out of scope. That'll be coordinated by the engineering department at a future date, likely within the next 6 months. And finally, adhering with the municipal development plan. The municipal development plan contains some high-level neighborhood design policies that should be reflected in all area redevelopment plans adopted after the MDP. It should be noted that while several revisions will be made to the policies within the ARP, the changes being proposed are considered amendments to the existing document rather than the creation of a new ARP, as much as the existing objectives are unchanged within the document. With regards to milestones and timing, administration has already begun and is close to finishing the revising the ARP in the TPT-CR district. These will be presented at the to the public at the joint open house being planned for October 3rd between 5 to 7 p.m. at the Coast Hotel. The intent of the open house is obviously to present the draft documents to the public and show where their feedback has been incorporated into the changes. Final draft of the ARP and the TPT-CR district regulations will be presented to Council for first reading at the December 3rd, 2019 Council meeting, with a public hearing proposed for the first quarter of 2020. The dates up there for second and third reading are obviously tentative. That concludes my update. Happy to take any questions you may have.
All right, thanks very much for your presentation. I don't have questions specific to your review. Just a comment or for conversation. So in the discussion on page 2 of your report, the second bullet point is that scope of the project should include supporting the creation of increased housing opportunities. And it notes specifically admin will explore ways to encourage the development of rental housing. And I don't know if conversations have taken place to date with residents of Teepee Town or in context of broader conversations we're having about specifically rental housing, it would be nice if as a part of this discussion and project work, we look for ways to encourage not only the development of rental housing, but encourage the inclusion of controlled affordable rental housing as a part of the build-out, as a part of the development. So at the end of the day, if there's a lot of rental housing developed there and people like we were just discussing in the previous presentation can't afford the rent, I mean, if it's exorbitant rent, it doesn't really benefit the community directly. And I mean, this is part and parcel of issues that we've tried to deal with for a couple of decades. But as long as we're opening up the ARP and proposing changes ultimately to the land use bylaw that may be germane to the ARP, if one could be creative and establish ways of encouraging, as I say, controlled affordable rentals. Just put it out there for future thought.
We will take a look at that. I think the challenge, of course, we have is we can't require a specific rent to be charged. We can only...
I'm aware of that.
Yeah, but I hear what you're saying. We'll
Yeah.
We'll look to see what we can,
Yeah,
we can do.
some sort of, I don't know, bonusing or whatever.
Okay.
Councillor McCallum?
Thank you, Your Worship. I wonder if perhaps the solution to that might be, I believe we're talking about lot assembly or encouraging lot assembly, especially close to the highway for rental. Is that what you mean? Or just in general rental housing through single or through individual developments?
So I think the rental housing piece would come through the suites and multifamily development.
Right,
Because you can't own it.
right.
The other piece about density, and we're looking at higher densities along the highway.
Right,
It's more of an encouragement through potential incentives to site coverage and height, et
well, and it
cetera.
also could be a marrying of like taking a look at the CMHC granting opportunities that are out there and marrying a private developer with those on their very own. Similar to what's happening over I believe that's a CMHC grant that's attached to the rental property that's being developed, kitty corner to Cornerstone. I believe that they have some grant funding that came from CMHC. So it could be just aligning or matching isn't the right word, connecting developers with those possible granting opportunities, and then perhaps bolstering with grants of our own, depending on what's being proposed. Don't know. But I wasn't sure if you were talking about the highway in terms of rental opportunities, or if you were talking about suites, and you're talking about both.
Yeah.
Right. I just wanted to clarify that, that's all.
Mr.
Yeah,
Fark?
sorry, and just to provide some additional clarification. So once again, an ARP like this is a statutory plan. And so there are limits to what we can regulate and include in a statutory plan. And so although initiatives like you're suggesting are maybe reasonable things for the municipality to pursue, they would not be appropriate in a plan. Yeah. Right. So, yeah, fair.
Any other questions at this time from members of council? Seeing none, thanks very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
And we will move on then to the 2019 mid-year bylaw services stats report. I know. A man in uniform, it's, you know, Mr. Fark's a sucker for a man in uniform.
I'm not sure where to start now. Thrown off.
Mr. Burt, the podium is yours.
Good afternoon, Mayor Borman, members of council. I'm here to give you a mid-year update, so January to June, and maybe a few snippets from the summer from our bylaw services statistics. It struck me this morning when I was thinking about when was the last time the department was fully staffed. And I couldn't pick an exact date, but I'm going to go with spring of 2018. And I'm checking now, and we're September of 2019. So we are doing well. We've had a significant changeover in staff, but also some really strong staff that have stuck around, including Tara Popwell, our administrative assistant, some returning staff, and a couple of staff that joined us from the town of Banff as well on their days off and are appointed as Canmore Community Peace Officers working 1 day a week. So that they got us through in conjunction with our seasonal staff and another full-time staff member. So kudos to the entire team for pulling together and continuing to focus on really our top priorities of managing calls for service, of which you see in the second graph. Numbers are down a little bit, but also looking at proactive patrols and our proactive investigation being anything that we would identify in the community and that would require subsequent follow-up. So something that we noticed that we would need to get back and deal with. Looking through, I review every single case report right now, and there is definitely a trend. I don't have a number for you, but a large percentage of the calls that we continue to respond to are for vehicles that are parked for an excessive amount of time in the community. As a reminder, we've defined through the bylaw that vehicles need to be moved every 72 hours. We've used the interpretation that streets are for short-term vehicle parking, and we loosely say 5 to 7 days, although we've written the law as 7. So there is a large amount of follow-up on those. It is time-consuming, and we do a mixture of reactive, and most recently we went out down Glacier Drive and Elk Run Boulevard, chalked every single tire, came back a week later to see how many vehicles were there, and did subsequent follow-up. We are finding, seems to be the Banff officers, which are our Canmore officers, so refer to them as our Canmore casual officers, have a keen eye for detail for finding vehicles that have expired license plates, and some of those being severely expired, talking about 1 or 2 years, or one interesting story coming from an expired plate that didn't match the vehicle, and in speaking with the owner came out and said, well, I actually took the plate off my vehicle and put it on this vehicle because it's less expired than the other one was. Yeah, so kind of interesting, the games that are people playing, and likely as a result of a number of factors as to why they're doing that. They don't have the money to renew it. I don't really buy that. I think it's more the fact that they likely have, a number of tickets that are unpaid that they're required to pay. So again, really focusing on that. And then a large amount of work or time was spent really starting off, as Travis was saying, back in June, so not ultimately reflective in the statistics, but on the early morning patrols. So we shifted our start time to 7 a.m. so that we could get out the door early, do our patrols through the gravel parking lot, conduct counts in other areas, conduct education when we were out there. So large amount of time was focused on that. Not included in the report, but just a few highlights from the summer months to give you an idea. Looking at our traffic and road use bylaw violations, for 2019 we had 607, and in 2018 we had 618, so not far off even with a reduced amount of staff. Again, keen, dedicated, motivated staff that we have between our seasonal, full-time, permanent, casual, and our administrative assistant. And looking at animal control bylaw, again, just for the summer months, so July and August, this is a combination of warnings and tickets, 12 in 2019, 31 in 2018, and that's likely as a result of less focus or less time to be out in and around on the trails. Moving forward, just where we're going for the remainder of the year, now that we are almost up to a full-time component with the exception of a supervisor, we're actually a little bit above what our complement would be if you remove the supervisor. So we have 3 full-time permanent staff. We have one of our seasonal staff members that is sticking around in a practicum role as he completes his degree. And we still have the casual officers to fill in some slots when our staff are away on training. So the focus primarily for the fall will be getting our new staff trained. So the legal component, the officer safety component, and then one thing officers have been calling for a while is trying to secure some animal handling and investigation training. So everything from picking up the animal to doing a full dog bite investigation to understanding authorities, powers, legislation behind Animal Protection Act cases. So we receive a large amount of calls in the summer of animals that are left in vehicles on hot days. I had an opportunity to respond to one of those, and we were at the point of had the vehicle unlocked, and it was going to be another minute or two until we were seizing the animal and taking it to veterinary care. So understanding the full gamut of Animal Protection Act, dog attacks, dangerous dog attack, etc. So trying to secure a trainer moving forward while balancing the new bylaw that was passed in terms of wildlife attractants and trying to be more proactive and also support our provincial parks team, whereas last year they gave us a number of locations where conservation officers had either spotted a bear in a tree or they knew a bear was in the tree as a result of the bear scat on the ground, the broken branches, etc. We simply last year didn't have the resources to follow up on those. This year, given our staff component, we are going to put more of an effort on that. And again, we always take the educational approach of trying to seek compliance prior to taking the enforcement approach. So that's a little bit of a snippet from the first half of the year, some highlights from the summer, and where we're going this fall.
Great, that last bit is good to hear, that we're going to be able to put effort into enforcing the changed wildlife attractant bylaw. That's great news. It's also great news that you're staffed up again.
It's great news for everybody, myself included.
Yeah, well, particularly great news for you, I know.
Thank you.
I just had one minor question in regards to the first chart in your report on bylaw services ticket and warning. You note the 23 tickets were issued between June 5th and 28th for vehicles parked illegally in the panhandle. Curious if you have the numbers that were issued for July and August at hand, or?
I don't have the I can give you the year-to-date number. How about that? So from June 5th to Friday of last week, 168 was the number for vehicles that were parked illegally in the no parking 7 a.m. to 9 a.m.
That's since June 5th?
Correct.
168?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Councillor Comfort.
Yeah, I just, to that first point that the mayor made, being fully staffed. So how's that going? Are you fully staffed now? Because you were so short-staffed. And is
Yes.
that because of the BAMP complement? Like, how's that working?
So the current approved complement for 2019 is 3 full-time officers, of which we're staffed with 3 full-time officers. The additional staff is the practicum role that's been approved. And again, the casual role, they're essentially now just helping us out fill some gaps when I have staff away on training. The one position that remains vacant currently is the bylaw services supervisor role, hence the uniform today. I'll be meeting with the manager of human resources and Sally Cottle to talk about really looking at the function of that role, because we have an opportunity to review that role right now and what's being called for in that role. Is it exactly the same as what we did before? Or given that the department is changing, we're adding an additional staff member next year, paid parking's coming on, we're looking at reviewing the human wildlife component in 2020. This is a good opportunity to look at that role and also look at the current role that I sit in. So that's a review, an internal review that will be conducted.
And that will happen soon?
Yes.
It will happen before we revise the budget, or?
That would be my goal, but.
Okay, that's all
Yep.
I'm going to ask.
Yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor Borman. Thank you, Mr. Burt, for your presentation. I don't see it listed here, but has Bylaw been able to respond to calls regarding short-term rentals and Airbnb throughout the summer?
So it's our planning, not our planning, the town of Canmore's planning enforcement officer that is responding to those calls and the follow-up.
Okay, so that's not reflected in your
No,
report here?
it's not reflected in these statistics.
Okay,
Good
all right,
question.
thank you.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Burt? Seeing none, thanks very much for being here today.
Thank you.
And the Canmore RCMP mid-year report. Sergeant?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me again. I did forward our mid-year report. I'll just draw some highlights out of there and be open for questions. I forgot to write in my mid-year report about our staffing levels and everything, but I'm still happy to say that we're doing well. We're appropriately staffed right now. Our membership, with the experienced members we have and the quality of members we have, we're doing very well right now. Obviously, there's always movement. Some members are going to be leaving us soon. We'll be bringing in some more, and I plan on just seeing just a continuous quality of service that we have, which is quite good right now.
Great.
On the support staff side, we are happy to be bringing on a new support staff position early in the new year. That will really help. With the functioning of our office, and the demands on our support staff just seem to be increasing. And I know there can be questions on how that is, but just simply the volume of security checks, criminal record checks. There seems to be more and more organizations requiring more, and that comes into our office. So we're really thankful to have that new position, and we will definitely put it to good use.
The office must be getting fairly crowded now then.
It's getting a little crowded, yes. The walls don't seem to expand when new people come, but we're doing the best we can, yes. We can always make it work. Just getting into our mid-year report, and our EPP is pretty well the same as it has been in the last few years. And talking about contributing to community safety, we talk about reducing property crime. I'm happy to say that property crime was down 18% to the same time last year. I can speak more to that shortly. Contribute to community safety as far as traffic work plan. If you looked at the numbers, our traffic numbers overall are up as far as charges, criminal code charges and provincial statutes, and that's truly due to check stops being conducted, more enforcement operations being conducted to address the priorities in the yearly traffic plan, months devoted to distracted driving, speeding, restraint systems. Even motorcycle safety in May, we did more of an effort to get out there and do some check stops and just speak to people on their motorcycles early in the season, just to make sure that they understood the rules and regulations for them and that their equipment was operating properly, and just so they knew that we were out there too, watching for motorcycle, for the licensing, like that. Impaired driving, I'll mention again. I said over 40 charges laid as of June 30th. If you look at at the stat sheet that I sent out, it's probably 100% increase over last year. I apologize for not including the exact numbers, but far more than last year. And again, I attribute that to our members being on the road, being observant, and taking enforcement action to it is truly a dangerous activity that doesn't seem to be slowing down regardless of new legislation. So that's a number I'm not happy to report seems to be rising, but I am happy to report that our members are out there enforcing it and having success catching impaired drivers. I'm just going to skip the enhanced shifts for a minute. The other two priorities that have been identified for us, employee wellness, to take better care of our staff and employees. It's about time our organization got on board with that, and we are doing a better job just providing opportunities for our employees to get together and to enjoy, to take better care of themselves and to enjoy more team building efforts, and we've had some success, and I believe that's helping us keep our employees healthy and our workplace maybe a little bit better place to come. And community engagement is a big one, and I think that in this community, I think we've always made that a priority anyway. We didn't have to have that mandated to us, but our members are in the school system. They're going to all the schools. We have multiple members assigned to each school. Some of us are coaching school teams, coaching club teams. That just gets us out in the community, and we meet the families of the athletes. We're not just coaching sport. We're meeting the families and probably getting to know the community a little bit better that way. And we talk about consultation, and again, we need to do more of that, but we're dealing more with people on the street, with businesses, with organizations, and with administration and council too. We're open to discussion, and I'm taking part in some of the committees and groups, and our members are too. We're working very closely with Bylaw services as well. I think our relationship is going very well there, and that's important because there's different mandates, different enforcement priorities, and dealing with the parking behind Save-On and some of those issues. We worked really well together this summer for that. Dealing with some crime trends, we do fall in line quite accurately with Southern Alberta. Property crime, other criminal offenses have decreased slightly. Persons crimes, pretty same to last year. I did mention break and enters. The numbers had gone way up. I know there would be questions about that. I don't think I described it very well here. I talked about the way they were scored and that they weren't all actual break and enters. When we hear the word the term break and enter, we think somebody smashed into a place and stole a bunch of stuff, went out, or they went in to hurt somebody. What I was trying to say there is a break and enter, number one, is if you left your garage door open, the big door, and somebody broke the plane of that door, went into a car and stole some change, it actually counts as a break and enter. And we had 4 of those. So that raised the numbers up a bit, because I looked last year, I didn't see any of those. The numbers we provide are the number of complaints. We had a number that were unfounded. An intoxicated person goes to the wrong door, they're banging on a door, they're yelling to let in. It gets called in that somebody's trying to break into their house. We go there and they weren't. They lived 2 doors down and they just didn't realize where they were.
Happens all the time.
Storage lockers, we had an issue with that this year, where I think that turned into a little bit of a trend where I referred to traveling criminals in the spring. Some people may come to town and target. We have a lot of parkades with lockers that fairly easy access, so we had a few of those. So as far as actual numbers, we had in business break and enters that someone broke in and stole items and left, there was 6, and residences that people broke in, and one, we still didn't figure out why someone went in there, but we had 2 where residences were actually broken into. One, items were stolen from inside a house, and another one where it looks like somebody actually broke in to find a place to sleep. So that's not including the garage ones. So I just want to explain those numbers a bit. Again, they're high, but I don't know if they're that alarming as far as more of a concern. And the spousal abuse, I know we talked about family violence in the spring. The numbers went down 11% from last year. It's still a concern, but I don't think, again, I think it just shows that it may not have been as on the rise as it looked in the spring. The numbers are leveling out a little bit, so I just wanted to note that. And those are basically our highlights, or what I wanted to know. Open to any questions you have.
Yeah, thanks very much. I appreciate the detail on the break and enter, because I was curious about that aspect of the report, and I appreciate you flushing that out a little bit. Councillor Comfort, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions, actually. One is just, given that cannabis has been legal for over slightly about a year, I guess, I'm just wondering, with the impairment, is that combined in there now? There's not a separate stat kept for cannabis impairment, or is it just impaired driving?
I don't believe we've laid an impaired driving charge for cannabis.
For cannabis? Okay.
Yeah, I would have to confirm that, but I don't believe so. It's definitely a concern for us, and we're still bringing our systems into play to better identify and deal with impaired drivers. But I don't believe any of these numbers were drug impaired charges.
Okay, and I'm just curious, because it goes from 2014 to this year, 0 cannabis enforcement, and this year, in which it's legal, there's 1 cannabis enforcement. So is that just somebody like being stupid? Like, I don't know.
Our enforcement mainly would be centered around tickets with cannabis within access of the driver in a vehicle, which is the same as liquor would be. So I wouldn't say we've really noticed a change in patterns or any enforcement changes due to legalization. We haven't really seen a difference yet.
Okay, thanks.
I shouldn't even say yet, we haven't seen a difference. I don't anticipate.
Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. I had a similar question to Councillor Comfort. What would constitute a charge under the Federal Liquor Act versus, is it a Federal Liquor Act or is it a Provincial Liquor Act? And is it the Provincial Cannabis Act?
Hopefully it's Provincial Liquor Act. Do you see Federal Liquor Act on there?
So I just, like, it was one of my questions I had lined up. So it was 84 in 2019 under the Liquor Act. And that would be open liquor in public, or?
That's provincial, yes.
Okay, so is that what those kinds of charges would
Yes.
indicate? Is it open liquor, or would it be a bar serving liquor inappropriately, or any of those?
Any of those are
Any
all
of those, any
encompassed
and
in
all
there,
of those
yeah.
things?
And the act is combined there, the Cannabis and Liquor Act is combined. So yes, so that's the Alberta Liquor Act, however you want to word it.
Right.
And that's for liquor in the vehicle, open liquor, any offenses involving serving.
Anything
over-serving
inappropriate.
minors, anything involving liquor.
Yes.
Yeah.
So explain to me then the Mental Health Act. What kind of charges would you see under the Mental Health Act?
We don't see charges.
Or-
Those are when we get a call of someone who's in distress, or they may have suicidal thoughts or
Okay.
anything like that. That goes
So it would be
under mental health. It's a provincial
Pickup?
statute that authorizes us, it gives us the authority to deal with people who maybe aren't committing a criminal act, but they're obviously in distress and need some help. So there's
Right.
authorities under the Mental Health Act that allow us
Okay.
to assist.
I knew I was going to stumble through that question, but I'm
No.
down with stupid questions, so I'm happy to ask them.
And to be specific about the cannabis enforcement, the federal has mandated the possession limits and regulations like that, where provincial and municipal have all taken different
Chunks of the
different pieces of
law,
that.
yeah.
So,
Okay, wonderful, thank you.
I have one other question in regards to a report or an article in the Outlook just last month, I think, about cyclists in Canmore, and the article, I think they had interviewed the RCMP, but it was noted that the RCMP had indicated that you were going to increase the enforcement on rules of the road for cyclists. And can you just talk a little bit about that, what your plan or thinking is there?
Sure. I read that article, and it was myself that spoke to that one. There were some really strong statements about concern for people's safety, the way cycling habits were going away. People were riding their bikes. I know Banff had the same concerns mentioned in the article. I won't say we've increased enforcement on that. We're not doing any bicycling-specific enforcement operations, but we continue, and we always have. If we see behavior that's dangerous on a bicycle and it violates a traffic law, we will stop and talk to that bicyclist as long as we can. If they veer off into a trail or something, we can't catch them like we could stop a vehicle. But we have issued some tickets to cyclists, and we will, if there's a behavior notice that it causes a hazard to someone else or to the person on the bike, if they're in violation of a traffic offense. But we haven't increased any enforcement efforts. I know the language in the article was quite strong, and I know our members are quite frustrated, and I think the people in the community are too, and there are some times where bicyclists do incredibly dangerous things, and there's some activities that cause concern, but we'll continue to go about it as we can. We do really hope, and we would like cyclists to play more by the rules, but we know that there's a long way to go before we can get there. I hope I'm wording that right.
Okay, I appreciate that bit of detail. Thank you. Are there any other questions at this time? See none. Thanks very much for being here and taking our questions.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
And Chief Galler, the Fire and Rescue Mid-Year Update. Chief, welcome back.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. First, I would like to apologize to Mayor and Council for missing the Walk a Mile event this year.
Yeah, we missed you.
It was a sad turn of events for me, but I have no idea that it was wonderful. I can give you a guarantee I'll be there next year.
Well, you'll see that the team managed to do okay without you.
I'm sure you did. I'm sure you did. Excellent. Well, with no further ado, a quick review of the mid-year updates. I didn't bother a presentation. I thought we could just go through the numbers briefly. So we're halfway through the year, and I do have, as Mr. Burt had, a few updates to close out the summer as well at the end. So year over year, we're seeing, again, an increase on call volume. We're tracking at 8.1% right now. I just finished including my August statistics in my monthly reporting that I do internally, and we're actually tracking around 10% right now. So we're seeing that year over year increase. The general pages, where we call all members out, is another 4% over last year. And medical events are trending upwards slightly. We're sitting at 41% of events are medical. Just for reference, in other communities that provide fire first response to medical calls, that is still a relatively low number. The metros are running around 70%, and similar sized agencies, you know, the Cochrane, Okotoks, Chestermere's, are hovering around 50-55%. That is mostly due to our population. We have a smaller population at risk in Canmore than some other communities might have, and the populations at risk tend to generate a little higher medical numbers. But still, we're hovering at just a little under half of our events are medical. You know, for overall numbers, 2017 was the big spike. It was the free park pass year, and everybody across the board saw a spike on services. We were at 660 calls that year. Last year, we were 586. This year, we're on track to meet or exceed 2017. Just to give a little snapshot on that. I thought I'd include a very quick update, and certainly can report on it further later in the year on the peak staffing trial. This was our first year that we trialed it. Council approved staffing upgrade through the summer months. So for the day shifts, we ran 4 staff on duty throughout the whole summer months. And there's no great surprise there. The turnout times just, you know, became very, very short. You'll see the trending line there. When we first started, the green line is with the 2 staff on. I think it's about 2 and change. It was a little higher than I wanted, but we were still getting our feet on the ground. Our crews had not, you know, really had the experience with that yet. And literally week over week, we're seeing a decline. I do have the completed chart of that, and we're just touching down around minute 40, minute 50 to get out of the station with a crew of 4. There are still a couple of little ways we can increase that turnout time, just the way we stage our vehicles and our equipment. So that went very well. This feedback from the staff, I mean, obviously was very positive. The station is the best condition I've ever seen it, and so is the apparatus, just because there's more hands on deck. So that's kind of a side benefit in addition to the increased level of service to the community, which I think is where really, you know, the rubber hit the road. Yeah, you know, and I just included with the night shifts, you know, there obviously that turnout is higher because we're waiting for the first 2 people there. I was curious about the overall response times, which is the next chart down. I do have the updated version of that one as well. When we had the full staff, the red dashed line is our 10-minute response, which we build the Alberta building code on, etc. About midsummer, we got below that. So we're our 90th percentile response times when with the peak staffing was under the 10-minute mark. And actually with August's numbers, it's even a little bit lower. So that worked very well. And like I say, we were able to accomplish a few extra things in the community, some fire smarting, some public outreach pieces, and just care and maintenance of our infrastructure was a big bump there as well. There were, as with everything, a lot of this recording is still done relatively manual through our computer-aided dispatch system, and there is always the anomalous calls in there that I've groomed out just for the record. We ran to Engadine Lodge once, for example. That was a 20 or 32-minute or 38-minute response time, so that really skews your numbers. So there was a couple that plucked out of there. I should note as well, these are for alarms, MVCs, and structure fires. So, you know, this charting on the peak staffing doesn't capture the medical, which we're equipped to turn out to immediately as we speak right now. Yeah, some general notes, and I hope I get them all right this time. I try to catch it every time. But we were ALS capable 91% of the time in the first half of the year. And we're dispatched to Delta and Echo events, so life or health safety is at risk. We provided a critical advanced life support intervention 4 times, and these are very conservative numbers because it's hard to glean that out of every patient care report exactly how critical the intervention was. I would say that's a very conservative number because by virtue of the fact that the number of medical events we attend, we do have a positive impact on patient outcome. But those 4 of them are definitively explained that we had advanced life support interventions there that changed the outcome of the call. We're on scene 33% of the time. In the first half of the year, we average, and that's just average 1.4 minutes on scene. If we go to the 90th percentile, which we tend to in our industry, it's much higher. It's around the 10, 11-minute range that we're on scene first before AHS arrives. That's about it. A couple of things over the summer that we're doing. We are attending the Calgary Fire Training Tower for our annual 2-day live burn session this year. It was described in the Dillon report. We're still supporting that. That is going extremely well. This year, through no cost actually to the municipality, we've included Banff and Bighorn. We had 4 spots available that would not affect the cost of this event. So we've invited them in a sort of a mutual agreement because we work together in a significant event anyway. That's really, really well received, and that's a pay it forward thing that we will return and benefit as we are invited to Banff and Bighorn for their training. So we're looking forward to that. That happens at the end of the month. And we just wrapped up the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs Conference in Calgary, which Chief Martins and I attended. That went very, very well. I'm happy to report and proud to report that Canmore really does not hold second place to many agencies, and regardless of the size, really in the country, frankly. Certainly there are things that I want to do better, that I want to bring us forward on, but there are other areas that I think we are actually leading the charge on, which I'm very proud of. That's just really down to those who have come before us and the people we have around us right now, so very excited about that. And that basically is where fire is at a nutshell. Obviously, we have a lot of projects on the way that have been council approved around life cycling and equipment, et cetera. That's all going fine. And finally, it just popped to mind, the structure protection unit, the trailer. I believe about 98% of the equipment is in. We are going to set up a little demonstration for council to attend. Of course, we'll organize that through the admin team. Just a little, give you an idea of what you asked for, what you got, and what the capacities are. We're very pleased how it's turned out, and we are at or under budget as we speak. We're just waiting for the decals on the trailer, and we'll try to pick a nice day and set up, one piece of each of the relevant equipment, give you an idea of what it looks like. I think the mayor, you'll be fairly familiar with it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to having that happen.
You bet. Yeah, it turned out really well. That's down to Chief Martins. She has led that entire process. Used to Walkinshaw as sort of subject matter expert and worked out very well. That's our world in a snapshot. Of course, we'll report in much more in depth at the end of the year or early next. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, and particularly the last piece. I've been looking forward to having that unit online and available, although we certainly had a less stressful summer this year. Mm-hmm. But good to have the unit in place. And you spoke to it a bit, and I think I'm coming to understand what you were saying, but the last bullet point under general notes, so the average time on scene before HS was 1.4 minutes. And so when you look at the chart on the previous page, so that would be in the early stage of the chart around June 20th, where it notes the response turnout time was just below 12 minutes. So is that, was that what was informing the arrival on scene, the average time on scene before AHS at 1.4 minutes, whereas you noted that if we were below the 90th percentile, that time on scene would be significantly higher.
Right. I think I know where you're going there. The two charts are not directly linked. So on the previous page, if we're referring to the response times chart there, that's not inclusive of any medical events. And the red dash line is just the 10-minute line that we're shooting for. We started and this refers to just turning out to structure alarms, structure fires, alarms, etc. So we started the trial, the peak staffing trial, a little over the 10-minute mark, and we managed to get ourselves under that 10-minute line. So we're for alarms, structure fires, not medical events, motor vehicle accidents. We got now with a 4-person crew, we're responding in under the 10 minutes. All that data gathering was completely separate from the medical. I can report on the medical anytime because we roll immediately with the 2-person crew. Just what we're noticing is that we're arriving on scene on average about 1.4 minutes before EMS gets there. So we get there and on average 1.4 minutes, the medics arrive.
I see.
And I just threw in the 90th percentile. Sorry, that probably is what led you to the other chart. I should have maybe had that because it was just for an interest's sake. If you look at 90th percentile, it's actually, we're on scene quite a bit longer. We were on scene on our own just the other day for about 25 minutes, 30 minutes. So if you use the 90th percentile, which is a much more exacting metric, we're on scene on average, quite a bit more in time-wise. So I just used the 90th percentile, kind of led you back to the other chart, and that wasn't my intention. Sorry about that.
Okay, thanks for that. It's always informative and good to know that the ALS-capable approach is proving its merit. I always appreciate having this report. Are there other questions for members of council? Seeing none, thanks very much again for being here, Chief, and I look forward to seeing you joining the team next year.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor.
All right. Moving on now to item E1, council updates. Throw the mic open for any questions of council to council. I have a question for Councillor Seeley in regards to your report on TCK. You note TCK has come a long way in a short amount of time. I'm curious, from your perspective, is there any discussion at the board level around how we're moving forward with the bridging document? I've heard from administration that economic development is working with TCK, but from the board level, where's that at?
Last board meeting, we talked about the bridging document and adding to the committee. So we're talking about adding at the AGM some more positions from retail, restaurant, and things like that. Is that where you're going, or?
Well, firstly, we have to put a bridging document in place, and TCK would be involved with that.
Yes. There was some discussion about the bridging document, but those discussions are just happening. It just came up as general conversation right now.
Okay.
They have met with administration, I believe, yeah.
Right. Okay, it's still at the administrative level.
Yes.
Okay. And curious as well around the other motion that council approved back whenever that was, May, or whenever we approved the strat plan for TCK, there was a motion from council to create a roundtable that is representative of the broader community and triple bottom line approach. Do you know if that's if the board is following through on that direction at this time?
I think it's all part of the same conversation, the bridging document and everything is coming together, and that's part of it, I believe.
Okay.
Nothing at the board level.
Okay, nothing at the board level. Great. Well, we'll look forward to hearing about the outcome of those discussions then. Councillor McCallum, did you have something?
Thanks. Firstly, I wanted to thank Councillor Hillstad for providing the additional statistics with his report with regards to occupancy or vacancy rather. That's really helpful information. I noticed that you've been adding that the last few months, and I keep forgetting to say thanks, so I'm here saying thanks. And then secondly, I want to apologize because I have no idea what happened to my report, but somehow the formatting, maybe it was just before I sent it. I don't know. It's a little wonkadoodle, so I apologize.
Couldn't notice. Councillor Comfort.
Yes, I also wanted to thank Councillor next to me, Councillor Hillstad. This guy. That guy. For the housing reports. They were very comprehensive, and having the stats is great, so thank you.
Councillor McCallum, question regarding your report on Bow Valley Regional Housing. And you and I have talked with this as well, but you note that at this time the project is bumping up against a revision to the National Building Code, which is coming into effect October of this year. You note that any projects without their development approvals in place at the time of this revision will then be subject to the new code. So what steps, I mean, there must be many steps yet required before the development approvals are in place?
Steps such as? So the plans are pretty, from my understanding, the plans are ready to go. It's been all about pricing them.
Right.
And Clark Builders has been refining it, and they've been scoping it back as much as they can. So we were, at the time of the project, before the project funding was announced, it was between 16 and I think $18.4 million was the span. The minister promised $16 million, and from the very beginning, we were telling the provincial government that that's probably not going to be enough. So through this process, they've been able to scale the project so that it's 16.9. But again, we have $16 million, so that's why, and once the National Building Code kicks in, we're looking at another $700,000 in addition because of those requirements. So the last report I received was that it looks like the province has said, oh, okay, if you're willing to contribute that, it's a go. So now it's whether they'll actually go.
Okay, so the report in that sentence is referring to development approvals from the province rather than municipal?
No, municipal, I believe.
Oh. So the projects get.
So they
has
need to
be
get going.
approved?
They need
Pardon?
to get going.
Right, so there's October 19th, that's a month, so
Yep.
we'll need to get all the development approvals at the municipal level.
That is, yeah,
in
and that's
place.
not a function of Bow Valley Regional Housing, that's a function of the provincial government.
Right.
So I can't actually comment on that.
Okay. Bit of a challenge, that.
Yeah, yep.
Councillor Hillstead.
I just want to acknowledge the team over at CCHC who helped provide me with all the information and whatnot, just for the general public, just so that they know. Yeah, yeah.
I have another question for Councillor McCallum in regards to regional transit. So the last bullet point talks about the proposed service level requests, including one item, regional service frequency. Does that mean what it sounds like it means to me, that the frequency of the buses will increase?
So regional frequency is actually, okay, let me rewind. So of all of these things listed, regional frequency is coming to our council first to be approved before it's inserted in the budget. And the housing piece is also. So yes, regional frequency means more frequency regionally between Banff and Canmore.
Okay, and that's been approved at the board level?
No, the regional frequency, I believe, comes to council first. This is one of those things where they need us first, and that's coming through the budget. And then the housing piece has to be for, so basically everything you're looking at right now means, is valued to the town of Canmore just, I think, just under $25,000? Does that sound right? Because I remember it being, oh, that's not so bad.
But the board, it notes that at the August meeting, all of those items were approved by the board, so the regional.
Outside of regional frequency. And the housing. But those are still service level requests.
Okay. Fine, that's not what the report says, but, so regional service frequency wasn't approved by the board at the August meeting.
Sorry, yeah, that was actually an error in my report. You're correct.
Oh, so it wasn't approved, or it was?
It wasn't approved.
Okay. Okay, but it's something that we can look forward
Yes.
to. Great. Are there any
I
other
actually need
questions?
to ask, Councillor Sanford, am I remembering that meeting correctly? Because you were there at the September meeting. I
There
wrote this
were
report the day
discussions
before
about.
our transit meeting, so
Yeah.
I'm getting the two meetings
I
mixed.
wasn't at the August meeting.
Mhm.
Councillor McCallum was there. But in September, we did discuss all of these proposed, and I think in your report, it says proposed service level requests. So they're proposed. And they would have to be approved by each of the individual councils
Yeah.
would have to approve those service level requests
Right.
because there is a budget allocation attached to that. So they will come forward to our councils at some future date.
Right. Did you have a question?
I did have a question for Councillor McCallum regarding the statistics for the BVRH vacancy report. And two of the statistics at the bottom, Community Housing Canmore and Rent Supplement Program, there's a wait list of 34 and 44 people in each of those programs. How does BVRH get more support for those programs? Is there, if the wait list is almost double what is funded, like in the Rent Supplement Program, there's 33 clients that are funded and 34 clients on the wait list. Is there a mechanism for BVRH to get more funding in those areas?
The mechanism has been by producing our wait lists to the provincial government through our strategic business plan on an annual basis. And in that strategic business plan, we have, for the last 5 or 6 years, asked for funding towards a business plan that we have for housing already. We have 4 phases to that housing plan. We get radio silence every time. So currently the monthly budget for rent supplement clients is $20,000. And we are able to fund 34 people with that, or 34 households. And that support could be anywhere from $200 a month to $600 a month. It just depends on what the person's income looks like. But as you know, you've lived here longer than I, there's been no additional community housing built by the provincial government here since the late 80s. So these statistics are sent to the provincial government on a very regular basis. And in our most recent business plan that we sent, and every year we refine it, we try to make it better, we try to make our numbers better, we're able to get better information relative to construction. And we have not received any response. So this is actually part of the, what I've been trying to say for a while, is that the municipality in Canmore and in Banff have done the best that they can with the shallow pockets that we have, and the provincial government really needs to step up and hasn't since the late 80s.
And so that's not a per capita funding, that's just a grant allegation that we ask for, but we get it or we don't get it.
Well, and the thing is that we need to remember is that all the properties that BVRH manages is just that we manage them. We don't own them. They are owned, the land, the buildings, improvements are owned by the provincial government. So interestingly enough, with phase 2, what's been tricky is that phase 1 and phase 2 originally, and that's through the lodge program, were meant to be funded 50% through the municipalities, and we've received 100% granting for those, except for phase 2, we've had to put $900,000. From the very beginning of this project, we wanted to make sure it happened, so we've said, so can we do the asphalt parking lot? Like, what can we chip in to do to make sure that this project happens? And due to a report from the Auditor General just previous to the 2015 election, there was commentary that to the government at the time saying, well, you're building these buildings jointly with other housing management bodies, but you're not actually taking responsibility for maintaining them. So the response to that was to therefore provide 100% funding for those projects, but they've been able to get less done over time because they're taking on 100% of the project as opposed to sharing it with municipalities. The other input into that, especially when you get to higher levels of care within seniors care, is that you have Alberta Health Services involved. So your building has to be a certain way for Alberta Health Services to actually take the contract in which to serve the seniors that are in the building.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm sure I told you more than you wanted to hear.
No, it's...
That was a lot of answer. Are there any other questions in regards to the council updates? See none. We'll move on to service area reports. Any questions directed to Section A of the CAO's office? Councillor Comfort?
Yeah, it was just, I have to scoot ahead to that. I made a note on that page. Bear with me 2 seconds. In the second sentence, the purpose of the session was to discuss the alignment of community vision with the vision for innovation, research, and education ecosystem in Canmore. So I'm just wondering, aside from aspirational principles, perhaps I might call them, Were there any concrete moves to action on that? What's next? What's going forward?
Yes.
If anything?
If anything. So there was a follow-up letter of intent that was issued from the University of Saskatchewan to Innovate Canmore. I think Brian McClure spoke to that when he presented his request to extend the timeline to complete his economic impact study. So they are working closely with the U of S. Since that time, I've had several conversations, and the U of S has appointed a point person. It's been slow just because the university, essentially everybody departs for the summer, and now it's been start up back to school. So I am waiting to hear back this week on potential meetings between the town and the University of Saskatchewan to advance discussions further.
So there might be some news in early October, perhaps?
I think that would be ambitious, but we hope to have is the economic impact study complete and presented to council in October, early November. And then after that, we would look to, there'd be some potential decisions for council around dedication of land, et cetera. If we want to proceed and see this happen, we'll need some council direction around that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just to add to that, post the meeting that the CEO described, there has been increased amount of conversation between university and both Innovate Canmore and the town, and they, the university, are expressing very clearly their interest in the possibility of being involved in a project here. So I think we'll see. It's going to move slowly, because municipalities and universities both move at about the same pace, but there's
I don't know, I think we're pretty nimble, Mayor Ballin.
Are we? Oh, okay. Took 5 years to get Arts Place open, but
That was for other reasons.
Are there any other questions then from council in regards CAO's office, municipal services? I have a question under economic development. No, I won't bother with that question. I sort of asked Councillor Seeley about that. Any questions under corporate services? I have a question under finance, talking about the number of assessment appeals that had been resolved as of the writing of this report. And it notes there were still the number of appeals had been reduced from 29 to 8, with 3 pending withdrawals. I know these reports are typically written several weeks ago. Is there an update to that written report? How many appeals are left?
I don't have the exact numbers, but we did have hearings last week, and we had 3 hearings, so that number had further reduced. And then in October, we've got 1 more date scheduled. Potentially, there may be a resolution there as well. So we'll be updating these statistics in October for you with a final.
Would that effectively have addressed all of the appeals?
Correct,
Oh, okay.
depending the one in October. Yep.
Perfect, thank you. Questions under municipal infrastructure? I have a question that falls under facilities 3H, talking about the application for microgeneration agreement with Fortis. And it notes if generating power in excess of the building's requirements, the terms for putting the power back into the grid would be discussed in this agreement. Are we likely to be actually generating power in excess of building requirements?
So yes, on peak generation days, it's entirely possible that we will generate more power than we are consuming within a certain number of hours. And because of the cyclical nature, you want to feed back into the grid at those times and then draw at times when you're producing less.
Interesting. That hadn't occurred to me actually when we were discussing it earlier.
Yeah. And the short answer is any grid-tied solar array requires this type of microgeneration agreement with Fortis.
Right.
In case there is, even if we don't, we still need the agreement
Right.
in place.
So in that, do you know if that agreement would have compensation attached to the power that's fed back into the grid, or is it just credit?
Yeah, so there is a credit that we receive back. I don't know the exact conditions, which is why I suggest they have included in here that the exact terms and conditions of that feedback would be made clear through the agreement.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. Any other questions in regards to the service area reports? Seeing none. The council resolution action list, are there any? Councillor McCallum?
With regards to the trail that is, and I haven't seen it, that's going up to the Nordic Center from that Legacy, the extension on the Legacy Trail, I have received a call that is where the stairs, the back stairs that go up to the top of Hospital Hill, were they affected at all in that build or no? No?
So the short answer is no. There were some short temporary closures while the construction was ongoing, but the stairs remain accessible and have remained accessible throughout and will remain open.
Okay, so they weren't like
They-
damaged?
Yes. I actually noticed that the one side panel from and the stairs is pulled out, and so there's some gapping. I don't know if it was the equipment that's damaged that or whatever. I was going to bring it. I did a good job and went and ran the stairs the other day, so I was noticing that those gaps do exist now.
So that is not planned. So if there was damage done, then it would need to be repaired. But so essentially, the intent of the project is to have the stairs remain in place and accessible throughout, and there's only one crossing of the pathway across the stairs.
Okay, all right, I have to go do those stairs.
Luckily, you live close by.
Not yet. Usually people do those stairs when they want to have a baby, so. But that's what I had been told, is that there was some damage to the stairs, and I went upstairs and I wanted to make sure that they were going to be repaired. And I couldn't tell you what it looked like because I hadn't been there myself, so, thanks.
Any other questions in regards to the council resolution action list? Councillor Comfort?
Yeah, could you remind me, or someone remind me, 238/2017, for the proposed off-leash dog park, work has recently started and will continue in late 2019. Where is that?
This was the open space plan. So this is an update to the open space and trails plan, right? So that would be within our planning department, and I don't know the status of that.
So it is actually now located in our Public Works Department. It is no longer with our Planning Department. And so there are, so it is currently, in all honesty, it has not been at the higher list of the many council priorities, and actually I'm wrong, it is still with planning, and so it has not been actioned as of yet.
Okay, so it's on hold.
It is on hold pending resources available to action it, yes.
And do we know what the location of that dog park will be?
So it wasn't a specific location. So if you recall the discussion, council approved 3 sites, and then we implemented dog parks on 2 of them only. And then there was discussion about reassessing the open space and trails plan and looking at other potential locations in the future, and that's what council asked us to bring back. And the assessing of other potential locations through the open space and trails plan has not been actioned.
Okay, thank you.
Right, so all we're expecting is a report on the plan itself, not
Yeah.
proposed new parks.
Yeah.
Nothing else there. I'll look to see if there's any questions in regards to the monthly bulletin from Bow Valley Regional Housing. And if there's no questions there, I'll move that committee of the whole go in camera to discuss the future event update. And we're going in camera to protect third-party business information in accordance with Section 16(1) of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. Those in favor? Opposed? We're in camera. Skedaddle.